So thank you very much, Professor Nikolaos. Greetings and salutations to all attending this open public lecture of the Master's Program on Ecumenical Theology of the International Hellenic, on behalf of the President of the International Hellenic University and of the Emeritus Professor Mr. Petros Vassiliadis. I was appointed to moderate this afternoon's open lecture of the spring semester of MOET, presented by our Archimandrite Professor Cyril Hovorun with the title Byzantine Ecumenism. Thus, we are very glad and at the same time honored to have this afternoon with us Professor Cyril, a very distinguished professor in the field of academic theology and also a very prominent ecclesiastical, I may say, figure engaged in many commissions and working groups. Father Cyril has proved to be an expert on the area of ecclesiology, but not only, since he has published a long list of books and articles in several languages, something which simply proves his great talent and the theological knowledge in general. Also, I would dare to call him a citizen of the world. And even though that it would need probably more than half an hour to present his curriculum vitae, though I will shortly present his CV, highlighting some important points of his career. So, Archimandrite Cyril Hovorun is a professor in ecclesiology, international relations and ecumenism and St. Ignatius College at Stockholm School of Theology, a graduate of the Theological Academy in Kiev and National University in Athens, and he has accomplished his doctoral studies at the University of Durham under the supervision of Father Andrew Louth. He was a chairman of the Department for External Church Relations of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, first deputy chairman of the Educational Committee of the Russian Orthodox Church, and later research fellow at the universities of Yale and Columbia, visiting professor at the University of Münster in Germany, international fellow at Chester Roning Center for the Study of Religion and Public Life at the University of Alberta in Canada, director of the Huffington Ecumenical Institute at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, and assistant professor at the same university. Additionally, addressing to those who possibly would desire to follow this lecture, I would like to say they can do so just by following the YouTube channel of SEMES. There in chat room, they could also pose their questions for Professor Cyril. And also I count on help of Professor Nikolaos Dimitriadis, who will assist us with the grouping and announcing probably the questions of in the end, if there's a need, when we shall have time for discussion. So after my Father Cyril, quite big introduction, I give the virtual floor to you with great expectations, I must admit, and we are all present here for you. So the floor is here for you.
Thank you so much, dear Father Augustinus. Thank you. Many thanks to the SEMES Center, to the organizers of this meeting, to the International Hellenic University, to Professor Vassiliadis, who is behind this initiative, and the greetings to all the listeners and watchers of this presentation. So I'm going to talk on an issue which is not usually discussed either in the ecumenical studies or in the Byzantine studies, and actually I'll try to merge somehow, to marry the two issues, the two subjects or fields, ecumenical studies and Byzantine studies. This is a kind of a new cross-section, if you want, of the fields. Therefore, I ask your pardon if I miss something, or I just get confused to confuse you. So let me try to explore this field of Byzantine ecumenism. Even though it sounds maybe weird, sounds unusual to some, because we are accustomed to consider ecumenism as a new discipline, and we usually believe that ecumenism was born in the beginning of the 20th century. That's why we call the 20th century the century of ecumenism. We are talking about the ecumenical era that started with the famous Edinburgh Conference in 1910 in Edinburgh, which launched the ecumenical movement. And for us, the Orthodox, really a milestone of the ecumenical movement was the famous encyclical Letter of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, which we celebrate this year. And last year we celebrated its anniversary. So usually we perceive ecumenism as a modern phenomenon. And when we talk about ecumenism, our mind doesn't usually go to the pre-modern era, to the Byzantine times. At the same time, I'm going to argue that ecumenism is a very pre-modern phenomenon. It's a new thing. It's not a new thing. It's a very traditional thing, and I would argue that ecumenism is contemporary. It appeared simultaneously with the first ecclesial divisions, when the first ecclesial divisions emerged. I would argue that it is actually co-eternal with the church itself. The moment that the first divisions emerged in the church, that the same moment ecumenism started to be practiced. And I could refer probably as the first reference, one of the earliest references, not probably the first one, but one of the earliest references to ecumenism, the words of Apostle Paul, which he addressed to the Christians in Corinth, where he pledged them, I appeal to you, brothers, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree and that there be no divisions among you, which means that there were divisions among the Corinthians at the time, but that you be united in the same mind and the same judgment. For it has been reported to me by close people that there is quarreling among you, my brothers. What I mean is that each one of you says, I follow Paul, I follow Apollos, I follow Cephas, or I follow Christ. So those are actually the earliest denominations, in a sense. Christian groups identified or marked by names whom they followed. That is the kind of the etymology of the word denomination. It has to do with the names of the first apostles and teachers, like Cephas, like Apollos, like Paul himself, and he discouraged Christians to identify themselves with with Paul himself. So that was one of the earliest, probably ecumenical message, if you want, in the earliest church, and it was probably not the earliest one, and it was not the last one. I would argue that the church developed its own structures, administrative structures, diocesan structures, dioceses, metropolias, metropolises, archdioceses, and so forth. All those supracommunal structures that we have nowadays. I argue that the church developed those supracommunal superstructures, I would say, exactly to respond to the church divisions, exactly as an ecumenical response to the divisions, because the communities, the earliest communities, they sometimes quarreled with one another, sometimes they separated, groups of communities separated from other groups of communities, networks of communities, the earliest kind of form of organization of communities, separated from other networks of communities. That's why the church started building its kind of superstructures, supracommunal structures, exactly in order to address the earliest divisions. That's why, things like dioceses, like metropolises, like patriarchates, we can explain those structures as an ecumenical response of the church to the extant contemporary divisions in the church. These structures they emerged in the early church, but they were formed, they received their present form in the framework of the Roman Empire. And essentially the administrative structures of the church copied or imitated the administrative grid of the Roman Empire. I would argue also that the Roman Empire provided the earliest kind of consistent, systematic framework for ecumenical integrity of the church. The Roman Empire, as after it began kind of embracing Christianity, after it began converting to Christianity, also provided the church with the earliest structures, ecumenical structures, the first mechanisms of securing the integrity of the church against the divisions. It started as early as actually as the Roman Empire began moving towards the church, and the rapprochement between the church and the state began. As early as 1 year after the famous Milan Edict, which, as we know, was signed by Constantine and Licinius, and that legalized Christianity. 1 year after that, Constantine, who was still the emperor of the West, he was not yet the sole ruler of the Roman Empire, he took care of the church divisions of the time. The most painful division at the time was the so-called Donatist schism in Northern Africa, in the Latin-speaking Northern Africa. And a similar schism, the Melitian schism, existed also in the Greek-speaking Africa, in Egypt. So Constantine took care of the Donatist schism, and he convened the council in Arles, what is now France, in 314. This was the first imperial council convened by the imperial authorities, and it kind of preceded the more famous imperial council, the Council of Nicaea in 325. I would argue that this was the first ecumenical council as well, not just the first imperial council, but also the first ecumenical council in the modern sense of the word, because the purpose of Constantine was exactly to address the schism, the Donatist schism at that council. He first tried to engage the church to kind of commission the task of reunification of the church to the church itself. Primarily to the Church of Rome, to the Bishop of Rome at the time. It was Bishop Miltiades, the Bishop of Rome. So Constantine essentially outsourced this task, ecumenical task, to the Church of Rome, and the Church of Rome failed to meet the expectation of Constantine. Miltiades couldn't heal the schism, and we know that this schism lasted for a long time. It was really difficult to tackle it. Nevertheless, so after Constantine saw that the Church of Rome failed to address the Donatist schism, he took the initiative in his own hands, as it were, and he convened this Council of Arles as an ecumenical initiative of the imperial scale. The Council of Nicaea later on in 325 somehow followed the same paradigm of the Council of Arles of 314. It also dealt with a local schism in Alexandria, this time not in Libya, in Latin-speaking Africa, where the Donatist schism flourished, became spread, but in the Greek-speaking Africa, in Egypt. And as we know, the schism, the kind of tension there emerged between the Bishop of Alexandria, Alexander, and his presbyter Arius, who was also supported by some other presbyters. He was not alone. He was not a lonely wolf, as it were. He had support of other presbyters and some bishops from Libya, from the neighbor country, a kind of place territory. And this was a kind of local schism, to some extent similar to Donatism. And Constantine tried to deal with this local schism again. For this purpose, he convened a council in Nicaea exactly to heal the schism. In this sense, we can say that the Council of Nicaea was also ecumenical. Now it was ecumenical in two senses. Ecumenical in the sense that the bishops from the entire ecumene, the entire kind of Roman Empire, were invited to that council. And in the second sense, in the modern sense, it was ecumenical with the purpose to heal the divide, to bridge the divide, and to put together different parties arguing with one another in Egypt. That's why I would argue that the Council of Nicaea was also ecumenical in its purpose, in its intention, together, of course, with the intention to establish the orthodoxy, the right Orthodox formulations of faith regarding the Holy Trinity. However, this Council of Nicaea did not bring the desired unity to the Church. This unity kind of spread further to the rest of the empire as a kind of follow-up of that council, because not everyone in the Church, most of bishops in the Church really did not get the meaning of the terms like homoousios, like the language which was elaborated by the Council of Nicaea, and the Church continued to be divided. And the Constantine himself, and later on his followers, like his son Constantius II, tried to address the same problem of the divisions within the Church by promoting different ecumenical kind of projects, undertakings. Sometimes Constantius II is accused of being Arian, because indeed he supported the Arian party, or the party of Eusebians, consisting of people like Eusebius of Caesarea, Eusebius of Nicomedia, who promoted the cause of Arius somehow. I think the modern scholarship comes to a conclusion that, well, it's a rather a misjudgment about Constantius II. He was not really a pro-Arian. He didn't know much about theology. What he cared more was the unity, integrity of the Church. He was just trying, to bridge the gap within the Church and to bring the pieces of the Church together. But because he was not theologically educated, he just made a wrong calculation whom to engage, whom to rely upon in this ecumenical undertaking, and he chose to rely on the Arianist party. I'm not going to argue now whether it is a right or wrong name for this party, but let us say Arian or Eusebian party, or non-Nicene party, it's a better word. So he chose to rely on that party in order to bring the Church together. He didn't rely on the pro-Nicene party very much, because he saw Athanasius the Great, who was the protagonist of this party, as a troublemaker, as a divider in the Church. And he actually hated Athanasius, not because he did not share the beliefs of Athanasius, but because, well, probably he didn't understand Athanasius, but because he saw Athanasius as a person who divides the Church. And for this reason, he was kind of seen for a long time as an Arian emperor. I argue he was not. He was just an ecumenist who chose a wrong strategy for his ecumenism. And exactly in the spirit of ecumenical kind of rapprochement, he convened a series of councils, which he perceived also as ecumenical, also in both sense. Ecumenical in the sense of pan-imperial, inviting people from the entire empire, and also ecumenical in the modern sense as bridging the divided parts of the Church. In this spirit exactly of ecumenism, he convened such councils as the Council of Antioch in 341, the Council of Serdica, which were actually two councils, in 343, then the Council in Nicaea in Thrace. He chose the place to sound like Nicaea, but it was a different city in Nicaea in Thrace in 359. And again in the same year, the councils in Seleucia, in Cilicia, and in Armenium, modern Rimini in Italy. So all those councils were convened with the idea that they are ecumenical, that they would kind of replace the Council of Nicaea in the sense of bridging, bringing the entire Church together and bridging the gaps between different groups within the Church. Yes, unfortunately, this ecumenical project of Constantius II failed. Why did it fail? Constantius chose, following the advices of his theological advisors at the time, he chose a wrong strategy for his ecumenical undertaking. He chose not to discuss controversial terms. Like the most controversial term in the original Nicene Creed was the term ousia, that the Son is born is begotten from the essence of the Father. Let me quote exactly how the original Nicene Creed stated it. We believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God, begotten, genithenda, from the Father, only begotten, monogeny. That is from the essence of the Father, ektisousias tu patros. So that is that last phrase, ektisousias tu patros, became really controversial. And that's for this reason, a number of bishops, I would say the majority of the bishops, rejected Nicaea after the Nicaea. And Constantius II preferred to drop altogether the entire terminology connected with the word ousia. That was his ecumenical approach. Let us not talk ousia at all. Let us use a very neutral phrase, homios, that the Son is homios, is like the Father. And this term was too vague, was too controversial, and it opened the door to the interpretation of the Trinity, which we call heterousion, the Eunomian and Aetian interpretation, which stated that the Son is unlike the Father. So this ecumenical formula that promoted by Constantius II actually opened the door to a very heretical formula of the heterousian formula. That's why the ecumenical project of Constantius II failed. However, this ecumenical project was revitalized again by Theodosius I, who, as we know, convened the Second Ecumenical Council in Constantinople, and he chose a different strategy. He relied now not on the non-Nicaeans, but on the Nicaeans, whom we call Neo-Nicaeans, including the Cappadocians. And he decided to reintroduce the Nicene formula as the basis of his ecumenical project. But, and that is my kind of point that I want to make, he did not just replicate the old Nicene formula, he amended it. And the Council of Constantinople, what it did, it dropped this controversial part, ektisousias tu patros, from the creed, exactly to meet the sensitivities, ecumenical sensitivities of the Church of the time. That's why I would argue that the Council of Constantinople that kind of perfected the Creed of Nicaea followed the ecumenical mindset. The rationale, the idea behind this amended creed was exactly to be ecumenical, to drop the controversial formulas in order to reach out to those groups in the church who could not digest this difficult formula. That's why my argument is the Council of Constantinople, the Second Ecumenical Council, was ecumenical par excellence. It really made some additions to the Council of Nicaea in the ecumenical spirit. So the creed that we use nowadays, the so-called Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed, is actually ecumenical. It's an ecumenical creed. It reflects the ecumenical sensitivities and concerns of the 4th century. And by professing this creed, we effectively profess a sort of early Byzantine ecumenism, if you want. That would be my conclusion from this story. Another story happened with the outburst of another controversy, what we call the Christological controversy in the 5th century. This controversy was really incited, I would say, triggered by the Council of Ephesus, but not the first one, not in 431, but the Second Council of Ephesus, the so-called Robber Council, which took place in Ephesus in 449. That council was not ecumenical. That council stood for only one part in the church, for the Alexandrian part, which was led by Dioscorus, the Archbishop of Alexandria at the time. Dioscorus was not ecumenically minded, unfortunately. I know that he's respected by our Oriental brothers, but I think we should agree, the Byzantines and the Orientals, that Dioscorus could be kind of a brilliant mind, but he was not ecumenical. He insisted on his own language, on the Alexandrian language for theology, and he really cared to promote the cause of Alexandria. And that's why that was one of the reasons why this Robber Council, the Second Council of Ephesus, failed. And it had to be amended soon by another council, which was convened 2 years later by the Empress Pulcheria and Emperor Marcian at the council of in Chalcedon in 451. One of the reasons why that council was convened, I believe, was ecumenical again, because the Council of Ephesus too, the Robber Council, created a kind of a chasm, a divide between the Church of the East and the Church of the West. The Church of Rome was really alienated by Ephesus too, and by the policies of the imperial policies that had supported Ephesus too. And again, the imperial authorities, following the line of Constantine in caring to bridge the divided parts of the churches of the church, convened this Council of Chalcedon exactly to bridge the gap with the Church of Rome, with the West. That's why I believe that one of the rationales of the Council of Chalcedon was exactly to bridge this gap. We can see it even from the definition of Chalcedon. The original draft of the definition of Chalcedon, as we know about it, because this council was very well documented, followed exactly the language of Cyril of Alexandria. But at the latest stage, this definition was redrafted, and the Western elements, Christological elements taken from the language of Pope Leo of Rome, were inserted to the definition. That's why we have this formula of the Chalcedon that we believe in one Christ in two natures. That was a language borrowed from the language of Leo. That's why the Council of Chalcedon really tried to put together ecumenically two languages, the Western language and the language of Cyril, which dominated the East. In a sense, the Council of Chalcedon was very similar to the Council of Nicaea. It tried to stitch together the pieces of the church that had been divided or alienated from each other. And like Nicaea, it did not reach its goal of putting the church together again. It caused further divides. And unfortunately, following the Council of Chalcedon, the church became further divided. And as we know, it led to the separation of the two patriarchates against other three patriarchates. The Patriarchate of Alexandria and Antioch, in their majority, did not accept the Council of Chalcedon and stood against the Patriarchate of Rome and Constantinople, joined by the Patriarchates at the small Church of Jerusalem, which had supported the Council of Chalcedon. That's what I call the Great Schism number 1, how it occurred, and it was the largest schism which lasts until our days. Its scale was larger than even the Great Schism II between the Church of Rome and Constantinople in the 11th century. And this schism really became a problem for the church and for the empire. For the first time, on a large scale, a schismatic group, a group that separated from the rest, from the imperial church, started creating its own hierarchy systematically, what we now call the Oriental churches. And this also became a huge problem, political problem for the empire, because those churches that did not accept the Council of Chalcedon, they were located on the frontiers of the empire, in Syria, in the east, and in Egypt. And those frontiers were particularly vulnerable to the invaders, to the Persian invasions first, and then to the Arab invasions. Often, people from what we now call Oriental churches, at the time they were not really like that, they collaborated with the invaders. So they preferred the foreign rule to the Roman rule. And this was a major problem for the Byzantine Empire, to have collaborators collaborating with their enemies on the basis of Christological formulas. That's why all the emperors after the Chalcedon cared to bridge, the gap, the widening gap between the Chalcedonian and non-Chalcedonian churches, without any exclusion. Every single emperor, every single imperial authority had its prime goal to heal the gap between the Byzantine and Oriental churches, the Chalcedonian and non-Chalcedonian churches, anti-Chalcedonian churches. This underpinned this kind of task, urge to keep the empire together, underpinned all the following ecumenical projects in the aftermath of the Chalcedon. There were some unsuccessful ecumenical projects, and there were some more successful ecumenical projects. I would call as an unsuccessful ecumenical project the one promoted by Emperor Zeno, who is known by his document, which was promulgated in 482, which is known as Enoticon. It was a document, an imperial document, a decree that prohibited any discussion, any theological discussion which would involve the term nature, physis. In a sense, it was similar to the project, to the idea of Constantius II, who had prohibited any theological discussion on the basis of the term ousia in the 4th century, in the middle of the 4th century. And as we see, censoring theological discussions did not work. It could not bring the church together. That's why the ecumenical project of Constantius II and of Zeno failed eventually. It did not bring the church together. Only a sincere and open theological discussion on very sensitive matters, sensitive issues could work. That is also the idea of a true ecumenism. In ecumenism, we cannot, keep silence on issues. We could not avoid issues. We should discuss issues. Only this way we can get closer to each other. We can really achieve an ecumenical goal. That's why any ecumenical dialogue, even in our days, that avoids difficult questions is destined to fail. Just as any ecumenical dialogue in the 4th or 5th century failed because of silencing the discussions, like what Constantius did or what Zeno did with his Enoticon. Instead of silencing and censoring theological discussions, Justinian, another great Byzantine emperor, applied a different strategy. First of all, he established the first recorded, at least, proper ecumenical dialogue. He brought different parties to Constantinople, to his palace. He invited Severus of Antioch, who was the leader of the anti-Chalcedonian party, to engage in the discussion with the court theologians, including people like Leontius of Byzantium, who represented the Chalcedonian party. And essentially, Justinian put those two parties together to a dialogue. It was the proper the first ecumenical bilateral dialogue in the Christian history, and we could say that the ecumenical dialogues were, as a genre of the ecumenical rapprochement, were invited by Justinian. They are essentially Justinianian dialogues. And he undertook something else, Justinian. He also tried to construct new theological formulas, new theological languages, so to say, lingua ecumenica of that time. And we call nowadays that language Neo-Chalcedonian. Modern scholarship has this term, Neo-Chalcedonianism, to denote the undertaking of Justinian. And essentially, I'm going to argue that the Neo-Chalcedonian project of Justinian was par excellence ecumenical. It was the ecumenical project of Justinian, the entire Neo-Chalcedonian theology and Christology. The method of this Neo-Chalcedonian ecumenism under Justinian was to reconnect the language of Chalcedon with the language of Cyril of Alexandria, to make this language more inclusive, to include both languages. And that's why the language of Justinian, of the Neo-Chalcedonian theology, which was also a lot of prominent great theologians of that time, of the 5th century and the 6th century, beginning of the 6th century, contributed to this language. People like Leontius of Byzantium and others, they helped, contributed to, even though Leontius of Byzantium was not Neo-Chalcedonian himself, but he certainly contributed to this Justinian project. This language included both terms, one nature and two natures. It stated that it's okay, essentially, to speak about one nature or two natures in Christ, contingent on how we understand those phrases. This Neo-Chalcedonian project, Justinianian ecumenism, was confirmed by the 5th Ecumenical Council. This was another major ecumenical council in the double sense of the word ecumenical. It was pan-imperial on the one hand, and it was also aiming at the reunification of the church. Its main purpose was exactly to reunite the divided church. I would call the 5th Ecumenical Council is the most ecumenical council among other ecumenical councils. Its agenda was primarily ecumenical, and its purpose was to stitch together the parts of the church which had fallen apart. This Justinianian Neo-Chalcedonianism was not that much kind of successful in its later iterations. There were other kind of attempts to build ecumenical projects on the basis of this Neo-Chalcedonian ecumenism. Like, for instance, the one which was promoted by the Emperor Heraclius in the beginning of the 7th century. I call it the Heraclian Neo-Chalcedonianism. Heraclius followed the same line. He wanted to use the language of activity which had been employed by Justinian to bridge the divided parts of the empire. Actually, his ambition and the ambition of the theologians who supported him, including people like Patriarch Sergius of Constantinople, was to create a language which would be an umbrella for all the divided groups. Like, for instance, including not just anti-Chalcedonians, but also to include Nestorians. That's why they eventually employed the language of one will in Christ. Even the Nestorians believed in one will in Christ, not to say about the non-Chalcedonians and the Byzantines. Even Rome subscribed to this ecumenical project of Heraclius when Pope Honorius endorsed the initiative of Heraclius. And that was a kind of a success, in a sense, of this ecumenical project of what we call now monoenergism and monothelitism. At the same time, some theologians, some profound theologians like Maximus the Confessor, and before him Sophronius of Jerusalem, saw a danger in this project. And being Neo-Chalcedonians themselves, like Maximus was a Neo-Chalcedonian theologian, but he saw a kind of a mistake in the direction that the original Justinianian Neo-Chalcedonianism had taken in the hands of Heraclius and his collaborators. So Maximus suggested a correction to Neo-Chalcedonianism of Heraclius, and he promoted his own Neo-Chalcedonianism. He also promoted his own version of ecumenism. Maximus was not an anti-Neo-Chalcedonian. He was a Neo-Chalcedonian. And Maximus was not an anti-ecumenist. He was an ecumenist, but with a kind of corrected version of ecumenism. Maximus was very much, I believe, an ecumenical figure. I believe that he was really one of the greatest ecumenists of that time, because he really tried to bridge the East and the West. We know how much time he spent in the West, in Carthage, in Rome. He secured support of the popes of Rome for the cause of diotheletism that he promoted. And he even convened the Council of Lateran in 469, a very important council, which was a very ecumenical event as well, bridging the East and the West. That's why I believe that Maximus was really a Neo-Chalcedonian and really an ecumenist. And his kind of corrected version, or the version of corrected Neo-Chalcedonianism, and his version of ecumenism was endorsed later on by the council in 681, which we now know as the Sixth Ecumenical Council of Constantinople. That was an ecumenical council in both senses, that it reconciled the East with the West, importantly because it adopted the decisions of the Council of Lateran of 649, later on the Western Council, and it reconciled the Church of the East with the Church of the West. I know that I don't have a lot of time. Let me just skim a bit, and I will come to my last point. So far we see the strategy of the Byzantine emperors, ecumenical strategies, to preserve the integrity of the church for the sake of the integrity of the empire. They endorsed dialogues. They supported and financed ecumenical councils. We should not forget that ecumenical councils were extremely expensive. They costed fortunes, and only the empire could afford to support the ecumenical councils. So the empire supported the ecumenical council exactly for the ecumenical purposes, because the emperors believed that the ecumenical councils would keep the church together, preserve the integrity of the church. When the Byzantine Empire became weaker, the West became stronger, and the West took ecumenical initiatives in its hands. This time, however, not the Western empires like the Carolingian Empire, for example, became the protagonist of the ecumenism, but the Church of Rome. Which was okay, because the Church of Rome always in the first millennium supported the initiatives of the Byzantine emperors to preserve the unity of the church. It was very ecumenical and very kind of disposed to preserve orthodoxy. However, as the millennium changed, and in the wake of the Gregorian reforms, the ecclesiology, the ecclesial mentality of the Church of Rome changed, and the Church of Rome began perceiving itself as the universal church, identifying itself with the universal church, and promoted insistently its own idea about the primacy of the Roman Church. And essentially the idea of ecumenism changed as well. In Byzantium, ecumenism meant the preservation of the fellowship of the churches within the empire. The churches had to stay together in unity, in communion with one another, without submitting themselves to another church, like to the Church of Constantinople, for instance. But Rome adopted then a different mentality, that you have to submit to us in order to constitute one church. And ecumenism started to mean a submission to Rome. Unfortunately, this is a medieval kind of model of ecumenism, which was also implemented in councils. Like in Byzantium, Byzantium expressed its ecumenism in ecumenical councils. So the Roman Church also continued to express its ecumenical vision in councils, but this time those councils were what we call uniate councils. They required that the Church of Constantinople would submit itself to the Church of Rome. In this period, the councils of Lyon, for instance, in 1274, was convened in the same spirit. The Council of Ferrara-Florence in the middle of the 15th century gathered. The Council of Brest in 1596. Those uniate councils also promoted ecumenism, but this was kind of a different ecumenism, I would argue, than the Byzantine ecumenism. It was rather an ecumenism of submission rather than the ecumenism of fellowship, as it was in Byzantium. And exactly, I believe, and this kind of medieval ecumenism, fortunately, was condemned even by the Roman Church. In the spirit of Vatican II, we should not identify modern kind of Roman ecumenism with the medieval ecumenism of the councils of Brest or Lyon or Ferrara-Florence. Like, for instance, the famous joint declaration which was adopted by the Orthodox and the Catholic Church in Balamant in 1993, condemned uniatism as a method of ecumenism, which was a very significant, I believe, declaration. And it meant that the modern Church of Rome distanced itself from the medieval kind of model of ecumenism. However, modern kind of Orthodox anti-ecumenists, because yes, we know that fundamentalist circles and very conservative circles, they are against ecumenism. They sometimes identify ecumenism with the medieval kind of Roman methods of ecumenical movement, of ecumenism. And I would agree with them that those methods are wrong. However, ecumenism did not start with the Roman ecumenism. Ecumenism started with the early church, and the most kind of important for us models of ecumenism were promoted by Byzantium. They are encoded in our creed. They are encoded in the way how we perceive the incarnation. As far as we subscribe to the Council of the Fifth Ecumenical Council, for instance, we subscribe to ecumenism, to the Byzantine ecumenism. That's why when we reject ecumenism in wholesale altogether, we essentially reject our own tradition. We reject our creed. We reject, the councils, the ecumenical councils of the church. We reject ourselves. And the people, when they reject ecumenism altogether in wholesale, they essentially, assault the tradition they pretend to protect. That is the paradox of anti-ecumenism, Orthodox anti-ecumenism. By protecting the tradition, they essentially reject it, because they throw away a very important part of our tradition, which was expressed in the ecumenical councils. Well, that's kind of my take on this. This is my conclusion that I'd like to make, that it's just another paradox of anti-ecumenism and fundamentalism. It's very much anti-traditional. It damages the tradition it pretends to protect. And people who are anti-ecumenical, they're just ignorant. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know their own history. They don't know their own, theology. That is the problem. That's why I believe that to be Orthodox is to be disposed ecumenically, to seek the ecumenical unity, the unity of the Church.
All right. So after this presentation, I wonder what I could say. We truly thank you very much, Father Cyril. You were a river, a river. You were a river without a stop. I have kept, I think, 5 pages of notices. But if I may, I have to give you a credit, because it's very difficult actually to describe in 50 minutes a history of centuries, and I think you did it well. And I think it was very informative, productive, and very ecumenical, your presentation, Father Cyril. Before going to the questions that we have, some of them I see here, I'd like to, if I may, say a few things about your presentation, also for those who probably were not from the beginning of your presentation. So just I kept a few notes, starting from the Constantine the First. If I'm not wrong, I do remember that also another name that he had, the Emperor Constantine, was the title of being a Pacificus.
Yeah.
The Emperor of Pacificus. So he was responsible in order to keep the internal, let's say, peace within the boundaries of the empire. So in order to be able to keep up with his foreign policy and with economics and with the alliances that he would like to develop. So he was not in favor of spending resources and time in theological quarrels and controversies. So he was in favor of unification or of unity between the different parties, because after all, he was the emperor of all citizens of Constantinople, not only of Christians, but all of them. So another that I would like also to refer, and I kept it as a highlight from your presentation, Father Cyril, was the personal relation between the Constantius II with the Father Athanasius.
Yeah.
It was something that you mentioned. And so I'd like to pose a question, if I may, that the personal relations through the development of the history of the church, we could say that influenced in one or another way, in a negative or a positive way, the process and the development of the internal ecclesiastical relations between the local churches. So the ecclesiastical figures had a great deal of influence on the general, um, let's say, historical process, right? Is it? I'd like to have a comment on that.
Well, there was a bad chemistry between Constantius and Athanasius. That's for sure. And Athanasius was not an easy person, after all. He was a fighter.
So, yeah, but in a sense, I feel that this is not fair to history. I mean, why, if two leaders cannot cope together, why they're not good, as you said, chemistry didn't work out, why this should go in a way of consequence to the simple people who just happen to live there?
True. That's very true. Yeah, that's very true. And well, fortunately, I would say, the theology of Athanasius eventually prevailed. It was justified by Theodosius, right? And we know that Athanasius won, but he had very small chances to win because the majority of the church, well, some people say that up to 80% of the church were Arians. Well, they were not Nicaeans, and Athanasius was a very marginal figure. And he was actually, for some period of time, he had, of course, the powerful allies in the West. But sometimes even in the West, people stopped kind of supporting him. Even Osius of Cordoba, we know that he betrayed Athanasius. And for some period of time, he was alone, Athanasius, in the entire empire who supported the Council of Nicaea. Well, it was providential that eventually his theology prevailed, but yeah, it's a miracle, and that's why we celebrate him so much. And fortunately, the church was not divided as deeply, as profoundly as it became divided in the 5th century, because we have another conflict, like the conflict between Dioscorus and the empire of the time, and it led to the schism, which lasts until our days. And it was also, to a great extent, a personal schism. It was a schism of personalities.
Yes. Also, another point that I would like to refer to is that you mentioned quite a few times the problem of the lack, if we may so, or the incapability of the language most of the times to fail to describe actually the sacrament, the mystery of the relation between humanity and divinity, because in the end of the day, this is the task, let's say, of the religions, to describe in human terms this relation between divinity and humanity. So when language fails to do so, we have these schisms appeared in history. And so we saw through your presentation, Father Cyril, these efforts coming from the emperor and from the state, how to gap and how to bring together again the dividing, the separating parties. So we have a comment, and at the same time a question coming from Stathocosta, Stathocosta, where she says, if you are considering that ecumenical, being an ecumenical, it means at the same time it is the one who desires also the convergence, excuse me, la convergence, the convergence, to come together. So being ecumenical means to bring together, is the one who desires unity, right? So it's a comment and a question at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point. Ecumenical meaning someone who desires and who acts in order to achieve unity of the parts that had been divided, the parts of the church. So first there is a schism, there is a divide in the church, and then the ecumenical efforts try to bring those parts together. That is the general definition of ecumenism. It's I call it defragmentation of Christianity.
Mhm. Also, if I remember well, in the beginning of your presentation said about this approach and this very famous teaching of Apostle Paul about how to keep the internal unity within the church. And it came to my mind the prayer of Jesus Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, where we have this John 17:11, right, where he prays to his Father to keep through your name those whom you have given me, so that they may be one as we are one. So probably since that time we have this anguish of the Lord to preserve the unity and integrity of his own body, if we may say so.
Exactly.
So it goes even back than the period of Apostle Paul.
Also, that's why I
The
said that Paul
ecumenical
was one of
character
the
of,
earliest, but was not the first one, certainly.
yeah, yeah.
And I'd like to underline in this regard that we
Mhm.
probably need to distinguish between oneness and unity of the church. We often confuse those two categories, but they are not the same. We believe in one church, and the church is one, right? But it is not the same as unity of Christians, because Christians were always divided, and they always try to get together to restore their unity. Uh, being to belong to the one church. That's why uh, it, when we confuse oneness and unity of the church, we end up being anti-ecumenical, because we say, well, we are in the church, we don't care about others because we believe in one church, and it's up to others whether they want to be with us or they don't want to be with us. But that is the problem, that uh, this kind of anti-ecumenical attitude stems from the confusion between unity and oneness. Yes, the church was always one, and it was always divided. And that's why it was always ecumenical, because Christians, I mean, bishops, emperors, whoever, they try to bring back the unity of the church, or in other ways, to actualize the oneness of the church into the church's unity.
Yes, correctly. So also we could say that we are all in the same boat, right? So, and since God is one, his body is one.
Exactly.
In the same way, his church is one. And also you mentioned rightly that um, it's not a unity, it's not uniformity. So we have to talk about unity in diversity. Why not? Why not? Because diversity, it's a sign of richness, and it's always linked with the cultural development, which is localized in certain areas, and also in certain time. In certain time. So that's why we say that worship is something alive. And
Exactly.
at the same time, the ecumenical movement has proved that Christ is not an object that we have to keep it just for ourselves, as you said, but we have to share it with others. So yes, I keep what you said, that the the separation was going actually hand by hand with unity, but just sometimes it was unity the winner, or separation the
Yeah.
winner of that relation. And
Exactly.
yes, please.
Just to follow up what you've said, that exactly the disunity in the church occurs when the church's unity or oneness is confused with uniformity. When
Yes.
when people try to translate the idea of unity or oneness of the church into uniformity, this leads to divisions. I believe, that was one of the reasons why our Oriental brothers and sisters separated from us, because the uniformity was imposed upon them to a great extent in
Hmm.
the fifth century, and this caused a reaction to this imposition of uniformity. It was one of the reasons, not the only one, but it was one of the reasons. That's why it is important to preserve diversity within unity.
Hmm. And I think it's also linked with the fact that, because of that, what you said, it's linked also with the fact that we in the East, we have, or we need to have actually, a deeper knowledge of the Western theology, which still remains a huge challenge while sometimes either we ignore it or consciously we neglect it. And this behavior, I think it's also similar on the other side of the river. So I think, if I may say so, that the ecumenical movement, what tried to achieve was to build bridges of communication and of unity. But we forget constantly that the two banks of the river are not identical. So from the one side of the river, from the one bank, you can have forests, or you can have hills, and from the other side of the river, you can have desert, you can have volcanoes or different stuff. But the most important is that these two different places are into now a status of communication, and we can exchange our talents, our charisma, and our service in order to achieve this unity in the name and in the shake of unity, in order to service uh, the society and the humanity as a whole. So also, let me, Father Cyril, Geoffrey Mukadizi, student of our program, says, so many Orthodox leaders I have had saying ecumenism is not Orthodox. Is it because of WCC, or how do you take? Um, and there's also another one. Would you like to give it now, or one by
Yeah,
one?
I will answer probably this one. Well,
Okay.
well, the ecumenical movement is not ideal, and it had many pitfalls, had many shortcomings and mistakes in the past, and also it was misunderstood to a great extent by many in the Orthodox world. So it's just like any alive process of peace building, of reconciliation that occurred in the human history, which has a lot of misunderstandings on both sides. I would not say that, again, that the WCC was an ideal partner for the Orthodox churches. That's why, initiatives like the special participation of the Orthodox churches in the ecumenical movement was needed in order to kind of amend the procedures and the protocols of the Orthodox participation in the ecumenical movement.
You mean after the Canberra, right?
Exactly.
You mean after the Canberra Assembly, 1991, right? Yeah, the Special Commission of Participation.
Exactly. And the meeting in Thessaloniki that followed up. Also, the Orthodox are not ideal partners for the WCC. We are very difficult partners. We are probably the most difficult partners for the WCC, and still the WCC bears with us, and we bear with them. So it's not an ideal partnership. No way on both sides. We just need to be tolerant to each other. We need to to bear with one another, and we need to properly to criticize one another from time to time. It's helpful.
But also, if I may, to be sincere, you said that, to have a basis of sincere dialogue. I mean, to base our dialogue on sincerity, and also that's why in the beginning of the dialogue between the official, dialogue between the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, the dialogue was characterized as a dialogue of charity. In order to break the ice in the first during the first years, and then we passed on to the second phase of the dialogue of the truth. But we have always to keep this balance between the dialogue of truth and the dialogue of charity, of love. Otherwise, you're going to be lost.
And I believe that the schism between the East and the West, the Catholic and the Orthodox Church, happened primarily because of the lack of trust. It was not so much because of the theological issues, because the theological issues always existed.
Yes.
They did not impede very much us, from staying together. What happened? What I believe, what was the milestone in the relationship, in the kind of breakup that we had, was the fourth crusade, when the Latins conquered Constantinople and really damaged the trust that the Orthodox had to the West. And of course, we should remember that the Westerners also were cheated by the Byzantines at the time, and they lost their trust in the Byzantines with the Comnenus, the Alexius kind of policies of cheating, the Latins. So it was a mutual mistrust that led to the schism. And I believe that nowadays the most important thing, even more important than the theological dialogue, which is still important, of course, discussing theological issues, is to rebuild trust And to rebuild trust, we need to be sincere with one another, and primarily we need to be sincere with ourselves. We need to know ourselves, what we believe, and what we want from the ecumenical dialogue.
Yes, sure, sure. So we have another question coming again from Geoffrey. He says the fall of Byzantine Empire exposed badly the East. Are we having challenges with our mode of solving crisis in our church with our patriarchs today?
Yes, we do have, and we always had. I don't recall any single moment, any single minute in the church history which did not have troubles, problems with the patriarchates, with the authorities, with the theologians. The entire church history is a constant flood or a stream of problems, of issues, and it did not stop nowadays. I would say that if we study the past of the church, if we scrutinize the history of the church, we find the past of the church much more outrageous than its present. That's why I say sometimes that the past of the church is really kind of a refreshment for our time, because when we look in the past, we find there are much more problems than we have today, and that's why, yes, there are problems, but we should not be afraid of just afraid of those problems. We should not be frightened by those problems. Just like with the WCC or other ecumenical initiatives. Yes, those partners are difficult, as we are difficult partners, but it should not frighten us. It should not, prevent us from engaging with one another. That's why the problems of our church should not prevent us from engaging with our own church nowadays. We should just be, good Christians. And those problems, actually, I believe that those problems are providential, because they urge us to get mature. That they allow us to grow up as Christians, not to be babies. Because it's kind of a childish attitude. Well, there is a problem in the church, I will leave it. No, it's a very childish attitude. If we are grown-ups, we face those problems, boldly and with courage.
Mm-hmm. So something else also that I would like to say in relation to what you said just before about the tradition. Do you remember the term of tradition regarding the ecumenical movement? It came to my mind that during the 50s and 60s, we have this, by that time, it was young generation of theologians of Western Europe, like Karl Barth and Ratzinger, Jung, and de Lulac, and so on, and so forth. So we have at the same time in the Protestant world and the Catholic Church, and in the Orthodox also world, we have some kind of a shift, some kind of a movement going back. So the slogan coming from the Protestant side, it was go back to the Bible.
Right.
For the Catholics, it was let's go back to the pre-Trinidine period.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the apostolic ages. Let's find our common roots back to the one tradition with capital T.
And I also think there was in the Catholic Church, it was coming back to Thomas Aquinas.
No, it was beyond him. And at the same time also the John Florovsky and other very dominant theological figures by that time. From the Orthodox side you have this slogan, go back to the fathers. So we have this movement from the whole Christianity, Protestant, Catholicism, and Orthodoxy going back in order to find their common historical roots. And so you see that the ecumenical movement in its first step was based on tradition, with the true meaning of the term, tradition, with capital T. So the ecumenical movement was based on tradition, on traditionists, but not on traditionalists, those who are identical with the fundamentalists and with the conservatives. So you see that the same notion of tradition was used in a different way. Also, we have another question from the Vocati President.
May I just
it says, how successful and
Yeah,
Yes, 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 yes,
comment on
please.
what you said. I completely agree, and I think there are different interpretations of this slogan, Florovsky's slogan, "Go back to the fathers." Some people really want to go back to the past, and instead, I think to go back to the fathers means to go back to the revelation that they had received. It means going up. That is kind of the alternative to traditionalism, going up. I would even rephrase this phrase, going back to the fathers. I would say going forward to the fathers. The fathers are not behind us, they are in front of us. We need to go forward to them, not back to them.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So we have another question from the. Did I say that from coming from the Vocati president? No, I think not. So, how successful and for how long the multinational character of the Byzantine or Christian Roman Empire was?
Yeah.
Did I mention that question before or not?
No.
No. So I repeat it. So how successful and for how long the multinational character of the Byzantine or Christian Roman Empire was?
Well, certainly the Byzantine, well, there was no such a thing as a Byzantine Empire, as we know. It's a very modern construct. There was the Roman Empire. And it had this idea of being universal, of being, potentially covering the entire world. And I think in this point, it cohered with the idea of the church, with the self-perception of the church. The church also wanted to cover the entire world, and they kind of concurred in this ecumenical universal vision. Well, I believe that the Roman Empire, called it the Roman Empire, was really universal. It was really inclusive in most kind of periods of time. There were different periods, of course, as in any state. There were tendencies of, self kind of containment, self-sufficiency, autarkia. In the empire, there were also tendencies to exclude, to fight, to protect the frontiers. But essentially, I remember very well the lessons which Professor Vlasios Fidas gave us at the University of Athens, that the Roman Empire, the Byzantium, always wanted to expand. There were no frontiers, there were no borders in that empire. There were only frontiers, and they tended to expand as wide as possible. I think that was the ideal of the empire. It was not always mad, did not happen all the time, but it was as an ideal. And that's why I think this ideal sustained the Roman Empire to be the longest living empire in the human history, essentially. There is a popular idea going back to Gibbon that with the adoption of Christianity, the Roman Empire started to decline. I think it was a completely wrong concept, because with the reception of Christianity, the Roman Empire reborn itself. It kind of resurrected, as it were, and it lasted longer than any other empire in the human history.
Yes, correctly. Also, if I may also make another input to what you have said till now, Father Cyril, so much interesting and important, is that also we have also we have a emeritus professor with us, Mr. Vasiliadis. Can you listen to us? No.
I cannot hear him.
No, me neither. No, I lost him. Anyway, so I was trying to say that also I think the ecumenical movement has shown the anthropological side, of the schism, of the separation, and of all this division. And also I have the personal feeling that sometimes we as Christians coming from different conventions and traditions, and I have the feeling that we argue to each other about something, about the ownership of something which is not ours.
Yeah.
I mean, we argue about Christ's body, which is not ours. It's
Right.
Christ's body.
Right. That's a very good point.
So we have to realize that, and we have to be, as more concrete. But at the same time, I have the feeling that we try to dehumanize God and to present Him according to our perception that we keep in our mind. which most of the times we do that in a not successful way,
That's true.
because our mind, the way that we think, the way that we worship, it has to do also with the local community where we were grew up, where we were received our education, and so on and so forth. So it's I don't know what to do, to say. I mean,
Indeed, there are different levels, I would say, of appropriation of God, and there is always this dangerous tendency to appropriate God, to make God our property. We can appropriate
yes,
God to a nation, like a nation contains God, like the Greek nation or Serbian or Russian nation is the holder
yes, yes.
of God. We try to confine God
Hmm.
to the clerical ranks. Literally, we try to put God to the pocket of our cassock, like here, and to keep him here, to keep him here. Or we try to appropriate God for, I would say, even for a confession. It is the same tendency to appropriate God, and I can. I think it's also a wrong way of appropriating God. It is our task is to be appropriated by God, not to appropriate God.
Yes, exactly. So let me check the messages. I think we have, as far as I can tell, I see no any new messages. I mean, new questions addressed to you, my father Cyril. Uh, oh, wait. Yes. Okay, we have Jeffrey again. He's very talkative, and I like it.
And good.
So he says, is there anything we can copy from West Church to make us strong? Not the way situation is. Second, for instance, Second Vatican transformed West Church.
Well, I don't think we need to make the
Would you like
Western.
me to read it again?
I think I get it. Yeah. I think we do not need to copy
Okay,
anyone
okay.
or anything, and we do not need to force our partners, ecumenical partners, to copy ourselves. They do not need to copy us,
Hmm.
as we do not need to copy them. The thing is to find a rapprochement, to find a convergence in a different way, not by copying, but by discovering our own resources. I believe in our tradition we have everything that we need for the ecumenical reconciliation. Eventually, to be one church, we have everything, all the sources that we need in our past, in our tradition, in our churches. We don't need to invent new things. We just need to discover ourselves. And I believe if the Catholic Church also looks thoroughly into its own tradition, and it tries, really struggles to find resources for ecumenism in its own tradition. It's quite successful in that. Then we can really get closer to each other, and that is the basis of our current dialogue. That is the reason of. I just want to remind. To say that we, for instance, there is a group of St. Irenaeus, it's an ecumenical Orthodox Catholic group that worked for over 10 years to draft a common document on primacy in the church. And
Primacy and synodality. Yeah.
it's called the Serving Communion, and it explores the forms of primacy and synodality in the past of the church, and we discovered in our own past, all the elements to bring us closer to each other. We don't need to copy each other for that.
Hmm. Probably we need to reread history,
And we do.
to reread history, and probably to exchange our resources, our sources, I mean, our sources, historical sources, because each side has its own sources and it's based on its own sources. So we have to exchange probably our, so to see what the other
Exactly.
have as
That's what we are doing.
as a base of
That's
dialogue and
the method of
communication.
our dialogue. That's what we are trying to do. We do it
Hmm.
in the official dialogue, Orthodox Catholic dialogue. We do it in unofficial dialogues as well. We
Hmm.
study history and we discover our common ground. Quite successfully, I would say.
Right. So
If there is no other
ah,
question, Father,
now I hear your voice, Mr. Vasiliadis. I can see you, but I can hear you.
If you hear me.
Yes. Ah, now. Okay. It was like a voice coming from the sky, but now
I
it's.
think Father Cyril was quite promising uh, for us lecturer, because we have just received a positive answer from Palgrave Macmillan Publishing House. They accepted our offer to publish the book on deaconesses.
Oh,
So this is a good sign, I mean, a good signal we have just received during Father Cyril's lecture.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's like privilege.
yes. Wonderful news.
I was not listening to a part of it, so I don't know whether you have responded to my question about a comparison of the ecumenism in Byzantium and the modern era autocephalism that has been developed, either causing or solving new situations, new problems. Can you comment on this, Father Cyril, before we close?
Well, I would say that there is a difference between the Byzantine and modern ecumenisms also. Well, I stressed, underlined the commonalities, but also there are differences, and we should be honest about them. The most important difference, I believe, was that Byzantine ecumenism was coercive. It was not just, people were invited to the same table, and if they disagreed, they were left, to go and to do whatever they wanted. No, they were forced to be together. Even Justinian, who was, who promoted the unity through dialogue, after they could not agree on dialogue, he just, cleansed them up, and he forbade them and exiled them, and people like Severus of Antioch, he was exiled, and so forth. So Byzantium was it continued the line, the traditions of the Roman Empire. Modern ecumenism is not coercive. No one forces the churches, to be together. Well, probably that is the problem of modern ecumenical movement, because the Orthodox churches do not want to participate, and there is no an empire which would force them to participate in the ecumenical movement. But I believe that that is the right way, to be to do ecumenism by consent, by agreeing or disagreeing to be ecumenical, to do ecumenism. That I would say is the most kind of important difference, and that has to do also with another kind of part of your question about autocephalism. That's exactly because our churches, autocephalous churches, they're not forced to. They cannot be forced to do something together. They cannot even come together to the Pan-Orthodox Council, because there is an empire which would force them. The problem is there are too many empires that kind of underpin their policies, and that's why they cannot come together. So yes, to be free requires responsibility. The churches, in order to enjoy their freedom and the right to act in by consent, they also have to be responsible for what they're doing. And it's not always the case that freedom comes together in one package with responsibility. Yes, what can we do about this? I don't know, honestly. It's really a headache for the ecumenical patriarch. I'm not I'm not, envious about what he's doing, about his role. His role is really tremendously difficult to bring churches together. Sometimes I'm joking, and it's like herding cats, and putting them together. It's almost impossible. The same is with the modern autocephalous churches. It's almost impossible to bring them together, to act together, even in the ecumenical enterprises. But yes, I think we need to appreciate the role of the ecumenical patriarchate, this very ungrateful, very difficult role that this patriarchate plays. And we just need to carry on.
Thank you very much, Father Cyril. Professor Vasiliadis, would you like to add something else? Or
No, just to remind Father Cyril that encouraged by the new development with the book of Deaconesses, I would like to ask all the speakers not forget to send us a copy or an extended copy or whatever of their lecture to see how we can do with this, because we have so far selected 4 and expecting further series 5 to see how we can deal with this, not only for the students, for the sake of the students, but also for the wider, since these public lectures are addressed to a wider readership. No, the floor is yours now, Father, for the closing.
Yes, I think I see that we have there's not any new question for Father Cyril. I think it was a very, very interesting presentation, Father Cyril. We thank you. We thank you indeed. And also, as all things, I would say, start and end with a story, and mainly all wise things come through doing a dialogue. I would like to end with a story from your experience regarding the ecumenical dialogue. I would like to end with a short story from your personal experience vis-a-vis the ecumenical movement, something, yes, that you would like to share with us.
Well, there are too many stories to pick up one of them, I would say.
Yes.
What I believe really happens, and what is probably the best outcome of any ecumenical dialogue, from my experience of dialogues, is that in the ecumenical dialogues we learn much more about ourselves than we learn about others. That's how I discovered a lot of things in my own tradition. I should confess, and I believe that is the most important thing. That's why, only for that reason, we need to be engaged in the dialogue. We don't need to be, to expect others to convert to our faith. Don't let others to expect that we would convert to their faith.
Yes, of course.
But what we really are benefiting from the dialogue is that we learn about ourselves, and only for that reason, it's we have to be engaged. That would be my kind of conclusion. Bottom up.
What about the local ecumenism? I mean, I have a feeling that in your country there is some signs. We don't know. We are from outside.
I would say in Ukraine, the ecumenical dialogue is really thriving. It's really alive and alive and kicking. It's very rich, and there are many ecumenical encounters because, well, Ukraine is very diverse. Yes, there is a kind of an autocephalous church now in Ukraine, but there are other churches, and there is a strong Greek Catholic Church here, a Roman Catholic Church, many Protestant churches, a Muslim community, very strong Muslim community. Ukraine is a traditional Jewish country also. Well, in the first Ukrainian Republic, Yiddish, the Jewish language, was one of the official languages in Ukraine. So all those dialogues are very important in Ukraine. I would say it's kind of one of the most ecumenically active countries in Eastern Europe. It's certainly more active ecumenically than Russia.
Right. And could I also pose a personal question from my side to you, Father, and that would be the last, if you wish. Yes. Are you in favor of, is it better to have a bent unity instead of a broken unity? Could we bend our relation with a different one instead of having a broken? And if that can take place, this scheme of unification could take place, what would be the benefit, or the...
Taking from the history, there were attempts to enforce unity, to bring unity by force, and they didn't last. for a long time.
Mm.
If you take, for instance, Constantius's policies, or the policies of again of Zeno, they didn't work for a long time. You can achieve a moment of unity by force, or by ignoring or silencing theological issues, but that unity cannot last. You can have a lasting unity only when you sort out theological problems, when you have this unity by consent of the united parts. And that's all the instruments that modernity offers us. We now take as a norm that in order to be engaged in a dialogue, you need to be free. You need to be free to disagree. Something that
Yes.
hardly was acceptable, in the time of Byzantium. No, people were not free to reject or
Mhm.
to disagree often. That's why it's a great benefit of our time, that it teaches us to be free, to act by consent, and I think that is a basis of a lasting unity.
Those who were opponents to the church's decisions or of the emperor's decisions were actually enemies of the empire. So there was no possibility to have a different opinion within the synodical
So
system. Is that?
sometimes it worked, but
Yeah.
often it didn't work. And that's why we have so lasting schisms that outlived the empire. The
Okay.
empire died, but the schism caused by the coercion, by such policies, they continue.
Okay. So also we have a question coming from Professor Dimitrios Keramidas. He says, thank you for your lecture, Father Cyril. My question regards the petition of non-Byzantine churches in global communion. For instance, what do they bring with their known synodal structures? Probably it's this.
Yeah, if you mean the Oriental churches and the Church of the East,
Probably yes, the Greek or the Greek
well, they are
Catholic.
very similar in fact. And actually, I should say that what we need to appreciate in those churches, that they are not non-imperial churches. They don't have this kind of legacy of empire very much. Of course, they were connected with their own empires. If you take the Ethiopian church, it was for forever connected with the Ethiopian empire. But what we have to appreciate in those churches is their non-imperial experience of relying on themselves, on their own people, on their own communities. And I think this is a very valuable thing. And they also have treasured a lot of legacies that we've forgotten. We should just appreciate those legacies. Of course, we have to continue discussing theological issues that there are. Well, even though after the agreement of Chambézy in 1919 and before that, Anne-Babisho agreement in 1989, we agreed that there are no theological differences between us because we've adopted this Neo-Chalcedonian language.
Yes, exactly.
By Justinian and the people. So there are no theological differences so much as there are cultural differences, differences of identities. And I believe the most important impediment for the reunification with the Oriental churches is the identity policies. People, cherish their identities. They want to be what they were for centuries.
Yes, exactly.
Their position to others. Like for us, we were taught, for generations, for centuries, that all those Armenians, and Copts, they are like, devils. I recently read, the writings of Cyril Lucaris, Kyrillos Lucaris. He was very ecumenical, as we know. Yeah, he was very open to the West, but he really hated Copts. He really believed that they are like demons, And this is kind of very much in our culture code, and this is very wrong, as they were taught for generations to hate Chalcedon, and they believe that Chalcedon is kind of a diabolic device. And this is not, this cannot be sustained by theology, by history. It's just cultural and I think pertinent, right?
Yes, the collegial identity, it's very important in the process and in the history of religions. All right, so I see no further any further questions. Father Cyril, with this, I think we should end our today's public lecture. Once more, we thank you very much
And
for
I thank you both.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Father Agustinos, also
Yeah.
for your moderation. It was wonderful dialogue that we had.
Yeah.